week on the Alley Oop Show, we've got a very special guest. We've been talking a lot about the NBA and, of course, the bubble experience, and we go to someone that on the ground has vast experience in the NBA. I speak of the chief writer for the Washington Post when it comes to the end. And he also does this magnificent podcast. It's with Sports Illustrated. It's called Open Floor. It does a few other little bits and pieces along the way. And as I said, he's been living and breathing what we've come to know as the NBA bubble. And as I said, he's kind enough to join us. And I speak of the great Ben Golliver. Good morning, Ben. Well, it's good morning for us. I don't know what time it is over there for you guys. But thanks so much for your time. And firstly, before we get into the NBA stuff, just give us an overview of what's going on in the United States, your own personal experience when we come to this thing that we've come to know as COVID-19 and the global pandemic.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, we're kind of like the most privileged people there are in the entire country right now, because every single morning I get tested still. I've been tested more than 80 times over the last 3 months. Wow. Every morning I've got to fill out a checklist that says, hey, what symptoms do you have, if any? Do you want to talk to a doctor? I have to submit my temperature reading, my pulse oximeter reading every single morning. If all that stuff gets sent to an app where scientists and medical professionals are reviewing it in real time, the NBA is not joking around with its response to the coronavirus. And so, we're sitting here in a situation where we're stuck in the bubble, and I'm actually getting tested this morning, and I'm watching CNN where they're talking about the president of the United States is in the hospital because he tested positive. And we're sitting here thinking like we're the safest people in the world. We got it better than the president somehow. So, that part has been very unusual, and we're getting to the end of the bubble experience. And certainly I think there's some anxiety from me and from other people about what's it like to go back into the real world. Because I think when I came in July, I thought we would be farther along in our COVID response, as a country than really we are. And so I'm going to be hopping out of this bubble and probably going back pretty much straight into a home quarantine. And we don't know how long it's going to last. But I do think one of the biggest stories from the bubble has been the success of keeping everybody safe. That was not guaranteed. When we all came down here, we expected, there could be players, our teams having to go home, players testing positive. We were all crossing our fingers. I hope nobody dies. How would you even cover a story like that? And instead, they haven't had a single positive test. You look at American football, major stars have tested positive. Baseball, they've had to cancel and postpone games. And the NBA has just been sailing smoothly along. So like I said, it's been a real privilege.
Hey, Ben, we are going to focus in on the basketball side of things, but we live in some strange times, and the NBA has been front and center of the COVID-19 or the coronavirus, as you've been referring to it. But as Australians, and we look at what the response is around the world, to put it into some sort of context, I live in a state of about 5 million people, and overnight we had 15 further positive tests. And we have, in the state of Victoria, or mainly in the metropolitan area, they've released it in the regional areas, but we have restrictions that I can only go out of my house 2 hours a day for exercise and go get the groceries. That's pretty much how it is right now. It was restricted. Two weeks ago, they actually loosened up some of the restrictions, and we're hopeful in a couple of weeks it'll even be further restrictions. But then we look across at our big brother, the United States, and we see over 200,000 people dead. We see the president getting in a car, driving down the street, and it's kind of just completely hard for us to comprehend, or certainly most of us here in Australia, just the differences in the approach. How is it over there when you see your president and how they're responding to this very, very nasty illness and disease?
Well, I would just say kind of more generally as a country, I think that I've always doubted how patient we were as a society. And certainly I am not a very patient person myself, but I feel like one of the most patient people in the country, because when it first hit in March, I kind of, I took it really hard. I thought, we're not going to have basketball for 18 months. I have no idea what I'm going to be writing about. What's the economy going to look like? I mean, I went through a real tough period there, for the first couple of weeks, but I also thought, hey, you've got to buckle down and do absolutely everything you can here for the next year and a half, if that's what it takes to stay safe. And unfortunately, when I looked around the country, I saw, people who had just a different personality. They wanted to open up more quickly. They wanted to get back to life more quickly. Perhaps there were some people out there who didn't fully understand the risk factors and everything else. And, it's heartbreaking. I mean, knowing so many people have died, it just kind of gets to me. There is a numbing effect after time passes where the number just gets so big and so big. And, people start, don't report it as often. I'm really proud of the job the Washington Post has done covering the story from start to finish. I've had my own little sliver of it here in the sports world, but I mean, hundreds of reporters have covered this thing across the country and tried to bring it as much fact and reason to the conversation as possible. But I mean, there's an awful lot of lessons, and I think for us, what I've told a lot of people who live overseas who kind of ask, what does this mean? Growing up, we think, you called us the big brother. I mean, we think of ourselves as the king on the mountain, right? I mean, the American exceptionalism thing is really strong. When we go there, I mean, we don't just call our team a basketball team. We call it the dream team, right? We're going out there to smack everybody. Yeah. And if we don't have the most medals in the Olympics, no matter whether it's the winter or the summer, this is a national controversy for us, right? And this has just been so humbling, I think, for people who feel patriotic in any way. I'm certainly not somebody necessarily flies a flag in my front yard, anything like that. But just for someone who takes a level of pride in things like USA basketball, takes a level of pride in, having the resources that we do, and to just see how it's kind of gone, I do think it's been very humbling. And for some people, I think probably even humiliating. And, again, I think that's why I go back to this bubble experience. The NBA has shown us, look, if you have a lot of resources, right, if you've got hundreds of millions of dollars, if you've got a product that you want to put on television, you can make it happen. If you follow best practices, if you listen to the scientists, if you construct everything safely, and if you give your players a reason to buy in and believe that you have their best interest at heart, you can make it work. And it's required huge sacrifices. Adam Silver has said that. It's, taken 3 months out of all of our lives. It's been uncomfortable and exhausting at times, but it worked. They're about to crown a champion here in the next couple of days. That was the whole goal. That and the television revenue were the two goals, right? And they're going to go 2 for 2 here. And I just hope that other American companies and maybe even American government officials take the right lessons from this experience, because they're showing you it's possible, right? We're not reinventing the wheel here. They're just saying, hey, stay socially distanced, wear a mask, just do the basics, and it will work. It will add up and help. And certainly, I'm actually, in some ways proud to have been a part of it. It's like, I'm proud that I haven't missed a test, I haven't forgotten a test yet. I'm proud that I've submitted all the paperwork that they needed to make sure that I could stay healthy. I'm proud that I followed the rules, and I'm proud to have been a part of a basketball community that really came together.
No, and good on you. And it's been exceptional watching it. And the job the NBA, like you've spoken of, has been extraordinary, because you watch a game on TV, and even the way in which they've set up the venue, the extent they've gone to the aesthetics of the experience of the TV viewer has been extraordinary. But one of the things that you can't ignore, though, is the fact that when you look at the numbers for the TV ratings throughout these finals have been down. In fact, they're going to levels which we've never ever seen before, which I assume there's a lot of factors involved. But there are some within the community, and even here in Australia, that look at it and point to the fact that the NBA is so vocal with social issues, and specifically with the Black Lives Matter movement, that they're pointing the finger, or they want to use that as an excuse for why the numbers are down. I personally don't buy into it, but is it relevant? Is the fact that you've got these high-profile athletes in a very privileged situation using that platform to speak, could that be part of the explanation for why the NBA finals numbers on television have been down a little?
Look, it's possible that it's a factor, but I think that you have some other data points. So you look at the National Hockey League, which has totally avoided that issue, and which is a majority wider European league and a Russian league.
Yep.
Their ratings are also down considerably, 40, 50%. And that's actually the best comparison point, because usually the hockey season and the basketball season, they run kind of at the same time, right? So if the NBA was seeing massive decline and hockey wasn't, then you could say, okay, well, the politics, that's the main reason. I think there's a couple issues they've got going on. First of all, the most surprising part about the ratings is that you've got LeBron on the Lakers, and it's not doing a huge number, because that's been one of the most reliable ways to get people to tune in. And so I do think that that's probably the scariest part from the league's perspective.
Yep.
But you've got a few issues. First of all, they spent an awful long time down here. I have a lot of friends who will text me when the finals started because they were tuning back in after not watching maybe for the whole thing.
Yep.
And they asked me, "You're still down there?
Yeah.
Really? Like, you've been down there for 3 months?" It's like,
Yep.
yeah, I have. Where else am I going to go, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that they crammed a lot of basketball in. I think there was some viewer fatigue. I think that's number one. Number two, there's so much competition sports wise right now in America that the NBA never faces. So football is king, right? Well, they're going head to head against football. They played, game 3, I believe, on Sunday night. That's football day in America, right?
Yep.
So you're not the biggest show in town, and that would never happen in June. You also have college football you're competing against and scheduling around. You've got the baseball playoffs. You've got hockey. I mean, literally everything is going right now. So I think it's segmenting the audience, and kind of nobody is winning. I also think you have a situation where we're in a presidential year where sports don't feel as important right now.
Yeah.
And even though the players have been out front and political, like, there's other priorities in people's lives. And I also think there's some people who are a little bit morally conflicted about, do you want to watch sports during the pandemic? Is it appropriate that we're going to, spend our time doing this? So I think all of those are factors. The NBA had another factor, which was earlier in the playoffs, they were playing games at like 1 or 2 p.m. Local time, right? And so you're never going to get the same rating at 1 or 2 compared to like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So the NBA is dealing with a lot of challenging things. And the trickiest part for them, and I think that this should not go underreported, there's going to be a carryover effect into next year, right? Because their schedule is not going to catch up, because they're not going to start this point until January rather than starting in October. So you're still going to have those playoffs run pretty deep into the summer and potentially into the fall. And so you're going to probably see viewership declines next year as well. And so that's a big factor for them. But the NBA can't deny these issues. But at the same time, an important point to make is, had they not done the bubble and just canceled the season, they would have had 0 viewers, right?
Yeah, of course.
So even if you're only having 5 million for the finals instead of 10 million or 15 million like you wanted, 5 million is a heck of a lot better than 0, right? And so I think that's the comparison point they're most interested in.
Well, it's also a fact that the international audience as well. I know for a fact here in Australia, where we love the NBA, I think per capita, we have more subscribers to the NBA League Pass we can watch the game than any other country in the world. So we love our NBA. And because we have been in lockdown, sitting at home, it's been the savior for me to be able to turn on the telly and just see a lot of games, because cabin fever kicks in and you go crazy with the restrictions that we've had to deal with. So those numbers, I think, aren't necessarily reflected in just the simple USA TV audience numbers. So I still think that it's still an extraordinarily strong product. Hey, let's start talking about the actual final series, because we thought that this thing was over. With the way in which the Lakers were able to just run over the top of Miami. We saw glimpses, in game 1, we saw that Miami got out to a bit of a lead, but it just looked like they had too much firepower. Then suddenly it all changed in game 3 on the back of just an incredible performance by Jimmy Butler. But has the series changed? Is this an aberration, or is this, you've seen something in this game 3 to suggest that there actually might be a series?
Well, look, Lakers fans want to blame me, because after game 1, I booked my flight home to Los Angeles for after game 4, because I was so convinced it was going to be a sweep, right? Yep. So as soon as game 3 happens, I get all these Laker fan emails saying, hey, it's your fault that they played so differently. Yep. Look, I don't want to take away anything from Jimmy Butler, because that was the best game of his life on such a big stage, and it was such a satisfying victory. But to me, it was a lot about the Lakers' self-inflicted wounds, the turnovers, the foul trouble. I mean, Anthony Davis and LeBron both played their worst game of the playoffs in the same game, and they're still competitive in the fourth quarter, right? And Jimmy Butler had the best game of his life. So you add all those factors up, and that tells you that the Lakers have a major talent advantage here. I expect this series still to go probably Lakers in 5 is the most likely, but we'll see. It's no guarantee. And it was nice that Miami showed up, because the tricky part about having the empty arenas is that if the games aren't competitive, it turns into like a funeral. It's just a really tough experience to be at, to attend, I'm sure, to watch on television. And game 2 was the flattest finals game. I've covered every final since 2011. So that's 10. So, I mean, I'm pretty proud of that run. I mean, there's definitely people who have had probably 40-year runs compared to me, right? Yeah. But being at all those games, game 2 felt like a scrimmage, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
didn't
it
feel
did.
right, and it didn't feel like it lived up to the moment. And I was almost getting a little bit sad there in game 2 because I'm thinking, man, these guys all fought here to get to the finals, and like this is their payoff. But we got the real back and forth. I mean, Jimmy and LeBron
Yeah.
talking back and forth. You know, you're in trouble. No, you're in trouble. You get
Yes.
Jimmy just laying his body on the line late in that fourth quarter, going hard to the hoop, just bulldozing through traffic. You've got LeBron trying to push back a little bit, pressing too hard, turning the ball over. You got some real juice to it. And so it was good to see that. And I do hope it continues. But ultimately, I'm not sure who guards Anthony Davis. I mean, even if Bam comes back, I think Anthony Davis has kind of been the X factor throughout these playoffs. He took apart Portland's front line. Houston's small ball had no chance. He won the matchup against Jokic stylistically in the Western Conference Finals, and he was just completely dominant through the first 2 games of these of the finals. So to me, once he's back on track and not in foul trouble, I think the Lakers are going to coast here. And I also, it's just hard to bet against LeBron. I mean, the guy's been so focused here the last month or so. It seemed to me like halfway through the Houston series, when he realized Giannis was in trouble and he realized Kawhi Leonard was in trouble, he started to realize, hey, man, the water is parting here.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a straight path here, straight to my 4th title. And he's been just locked in. So to me, it was just an aberration there in game 3. They're going to get it back on track. But it was a fun aberration. I mean, just side note, like my very first cover story I ever wrote for Sports Illustrated was about Jimmy Butler. And I wrote it in 2015. It was his first cover story he'd ever had. And it was his big breakout year. You know, he was just a defensive stopper. You know, I mean, he was a designated defensive player earlier in his career, and he was kind of breaking into an all-star that year. And so, you know, he was homeless when he was in high school. And the mother who adopted him took him in. It was the mother of one of his teammates. And she is so loyal to him that she actually bans LeBron James sneakers from her household. Her kids are not allowed to wear LeBron James sneakers. That's how personal this rivalry is between LeBron and Jimmy. And you'll remember back to 2013, Jimmy's 23 years old. Tom Thibodeau has him out there chasing LeBron around in the playoffs. He played all 48 minutes, did not sit out a single second in 3 of the 5 playoff games. And then you go to 2015, LeBron buries a buzzer beater right in Jimmy's face to swing the course of that series between the Bulls and the Cavaliers. And so Jimmy's been waiting 5 years for his revenge, right?
Yeah.
And the last 5 games going into game 3 that they had played in the playoffs, LeBron had won all 5. Career LeBron had been 10-3 against Jimmy in the playoffs. So this is not a rivalry that anybody else talks about because it's LeBron and KD. It's LeBron and Kawhi. It's LeBron and Steph Curry, LeBron and Duncan. Like, those are the Hall of Fame guys he gets compared to. But if you're Jimmy Butler, you've been dealing with big brother LeBron for the last 7 years of your life. To finally have that moment in game 3, I mean, that's just like the sweetest satisfaction possible for a competitor, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And his story, like you mentioned, it's emotional because of the path that's got him there. But that Jimmy has had some issues along the way. Now, I don't think it's more been some relationship issues with some players in Minnesota, you know, some coaching issues, and but is it? In your judgment, is it something that you look at him as just that he's high maintenance, he's got a problem, or is there some validity to it? It's all now you're winning, it's everyone, yeah, Jimmy, but has he had some problems throughout the journey?
Well, of course. I mean, look, it's another takeaway from game 3 is we should have known that the Heat weren't going to go quietly because Jimmy has never gone quietly anywhere in his life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's not afraid to burn bridges.
Yeah.
And I think in some cases that could actually be a strength for him because it allows him to be his true self and to try to find a situation that will actually work. Like if he feels like, you know, he's in kind of a dysfunctional relationship, he's not going to like sit around and let it be toxic. He's just going to hit the eject button and get out there. And sometimes that's better for both parties. You know, it's like, you know, you're in a relationship with someone that's not working out. Like you can kind of hang around and kind of tiptoe around it, or you can kind of pull the plug. And I think sometimes people say, well, it's better to pull the plug. The thing with Jimmy, I mean, he's just very confrontational. And to me, it goes back to his high school. And his adoptive mother told me this too. She said, look, he bounced around so much from house to house that he sort of internalized this idea that you always have to be on the move. You can never slow down. You always have to be going on to the next thing, whether it's him running from responsibilities, whether it's him running from authority sometimes. it just became this idea where he was never comfortable staying in the same place at the same time. And that's shown out through his basketball career too. You know, he gets into Chicago and he's calling out Fred Hoiberg for being too nice of a guy, for not holding people accountable. And he's not afraid to say that publicly. That rubs people the wrong way. He goes to Minnesota. It's the same thing with Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. He goes to Philadelphia. It's kind of the same thing with Brett Brown in the front office. You know, he comes out and tells everybody he doesn't know who's in charge there. He's someone who's actually, even though he's seen as kind of this anti-authoritarian figure because he's always pushing back and pushing the envelope, he actually craves authority. I mean, his best coaches have been the toughest ones. You know, Buzz Williams in college pushed him like crazy, rode him like crazy in practice, screaming at him to bring the best out of him. Tom Thibodeau, he got along with Tibbs because Tibbs would play him a bunch of minutes, give him a lot of responsibility, and hold him accountable. And he likes Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley for the same reasons. Those guys just want to win, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. And so, you know, I think he is just uncompromising, and he is one of the few people who says he doesn't care if he's liked and actually mean it. You know, NBA superstars, they love to say, oh, I don't care what people think about me. Well, a lot of you guys are reading what's said online. A lot of you guys are, you know, getting a little bit angry if a question is asked the wrong way, a little bit sensitive and all that. And Jimmy just flat out doesn't care. And he is so focused on the future. There's that famous line that he said, well, he took out the rear view mirrors from his minivan. He drives a minivan around. He took the rear view mirrors out because he never wants to look backwards. And, you know, it's kind of corny, but it's completely who he is, right? I mean, it's just always about what's the next stop, what's the next thing that he can do. And, you know, I do think it's just kind of important background context on his personality. This just does not come from nowhere, right? I mean, this is coming from a place where the stability elements of his life, you know, his mother and his father, just his biological parents weren't there, and he was left to fend for himself. And he realized that activity and energy and just continuing to move was his path to success.
When you think of that Miami team, I see it as overachieving what they've been able to do. And Eric Spoelstra, you mentioned him and how he runs the show there. Just his schemes offensively, defensively, zone defense, his confidence, and I guess when you've won a couple of titles, you prepared to take some risk and know that if it doesn't work, there might be some criticism. But even in that game, the subtleties, the way in which they double team Anthony Davis, those elements to it. Is this, for me, it's a surprise. To you, is it a surprise what Miami have been able to do? Or because good talent, but to me, not quite the same level of talent. You look at a lot of these other rosters.
Absolutely. I mean, they beat Milwaukee, who's a better team, and Boston, who's a better team. I think even more than the X's and O's, and like their zone defense has got a lot of attention at various points, and their balance of their offense in terms of how unselfish they are has gotten a lot of attention, and rightfully so. To me, this is more about what they call the heat culture, or what they call just the off-court chemistry, because I'm not sure they have the same run if it's not in the bubble, right? If they have to go on the road and beat some of these teams, if they have to travel like a normal season, I'm not sure they make the finals.
Yeah.
But when you get down here and you experience it, this bubble tests your camaraderie. It tests your team cohesiveness. It tests your authority structures in terms of, are guys going to stay bought in? A perfect example is Houston. They're in the middle of a playoff series against the Lakers, and one of their players has this liaison with, some sort of a contract employee, and he gets sent home in the middle of a playoff series.
Yeah.
Would that ever happen on the Miami Heat in a million years? The answer is absolutely no way. You look at the Los Angeles Clippers, they combust up 3-1. They lose 3 straight. Chemistry questions, coach gets fired, superstars pointing fingers, role players pointing fingers. Again, they're not aligned, right? The bubble broke them, you know? Same deal for Milwaukee. You know, I think for different reasons. I mean, I think the bubble just overwhelmed them in part because of the racial protests that they were really focusing a lot of their energy on. And in part because they had some injury issues and like they just were a little bit scatterbrained, never quite put their season back together. But the bubble broke the Milwaukee Bucks too. And so you can see some really high profile teams with very talented players. Again, players who are more talented than Miami's players, like you're mentioning, you know, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Giannis. I mean, all those guys are more talented than anybody on Miami's roster. And yet they just didn't have the togetherness factor. And that's what's really so important about Miami's run. And you look at the other teams in the Eastern Conference who did the best, it was Boston and Toronto, who, again, both have great cultures, right?
Yeah.
I mean, really good coaching, players who are bought in, they play hard on defense, unselfish on offense, team-oriented organizations with, long-standing front offices. So it really seems to me like the key elements of the teams that have had success, especially in the East, are stability from organization, clear vision, and then, team-based approaches rather than superstars. I mean, that was really what worked here. The Lakers are the grand exception. And the reason why they're the exception, and they have a brand new coach, they have a brand new front office, they got a brand new superstar in Anthony Davis, they got a whole bunch of new starters. The reason why they're the exception is because they have the two best players in Orlando with LeBron and AD. And those two guys have been playing great the whole way through. But I do think that a lot of Miami's credit is just to being built for the bubble is probably the best way to put it.
No, it is. It's been special. It's been great to watch. Just the aesthetic of the way they play at both ends of the floor. The game, so much ISO ball, and which you appreciate the athleticism. But I think that they've really found that balance in the way in which they move the ball and get the best out of their players, and their system seems to generate better opportunities for these players to express themselves rather than what we see with just relying on sheer talent. And there's no doubting the talent of the Los Angeles Lakers. But LeBron James, as long as he continues to play, everyone's just going to talk about him and his legacy because he is a star. I love him to death. But where do you see his output and this result, if it goes the way we're all expecting to do? Is it just as meaningful because of the so-called asterisks that'll be associated with this season as it would be under a regular season?
Yeah, well, for sure. One quick final point on Miami. I would just say that, like, part of their offensive balance, it works because Jimmy is okay to step back every once in a while,
Correct.
right? He is not that typical alpha guy and he stepped forward when they needed him. When there's these other injuries, now he does more. But he's okay with other guys getting lots of shots and being okay with that. And not every star in the NBA is like that. And I think that makes it's kind of a unique thing. And it's a check mark in his category, by the way, because people would say, oh, you're a malcontent or you're a hothead or all this. Well, he's showing that he's a team player too in Miami. So you got to give him a little bit of love for that.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of LeBron and the asterisk, I'm really strongly in the camp of no asterisk. And part of the reason is because I've been here and I've been going through what they have to kind of go through. And it's hard even just writing every night, let alone playing. I mean, it just really adds up. And I also think that the better team has won. I guess I shouldn't say better team, not the more talented team always, but the more deserving team has won all these series, right? They've had their opportunities on a neutral site. You've had your chance to go out there and prove it. And time after time, the team that was stronger mentally, that was able to hold up to injury issues and to absences and everything else has been the team that's come out on top. And the Lakers really haven't even been challenged really that much. I mean, they haven't been pushed that hard. And so I think from that standpoint, they would be worthy champions if they close this thing out. LeBron has been the dominant force for them offensively, orchestrating everything. He's made all of his teammates better, including Anthony Davis. He's had a phenomenal mental approach, just, gradually ramping up step by step throughout the bubble to kind of have his team in position ready to do it. And he's also carried a huge burden in terms of media responsibilities, in terms of advocacy, the voting rights stuff, making sure that they kept the season on track. And, I think Patrick Beverley from the Clippers was the one who said it before we even got down here, which is, if LeBron wants to play, we're all going to play. And I think that's true. If LeBron didn't want to play, I'm not sure they even build the bubble, right? I'm not even sure if they go to all this expense to do it because he's that big of a star. So to me, as amazing as that 2016 finals was, I think there's a case if they win this title, this is like the crowning achievement of his career. And I know some people would push back and say, oh, it's a weird year. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Kyrie Irving, all these guys didn't even play. Giannis had the ankle injury. Kawhi Leonard imploded. I mean, all this other stuff happened. But still, to be able to come through it on a daily basis and to survive the grind is just very symbolic of his career. All of his contemporaries, Carmelo, Dwayne Wade, these guys stopped being superstars a long time ago. For LeBron to show up in Orlando and reestablish himself as the best player in basketball and to potentially win a title at age 35 is pretty darn ridiculous. And, again, it's not that surprising because nothing LeBron does is that surprising. Because he's done so many things, but it is absolutely thrilling
Yeah.
And it's really impressive. So to me, I say throw all the asterisk talk away. We're going to remember the Lakers as the bubble champions. And if they do win, people will immediately want to start the conversation. Well, now they have to prove it, right? Now they have to go back to back. I mean, it's going to take 2 days. I promise you. Within 2 days, people are going to be saying, well, you guys got to prove it in a normal season next year, right? And that's fine. I understand that's how the media cycles work. But I would just like to say, give these guys a moment to really cherish it if they do finish this off, because it's been a crazy run for them with Kobe and the Hong Kong controversy and everything else in between.
And it's interesting when it comes to LeBron, because I feel like I'm aligned. I'm aligned with his values of the issues that he speaks about off the floor. So for me, it's easy to love the man. But even those that perhaps have a different view will look at little things that happen. And they are so small, and perhaps people don't understand the context that these things happen, and they make big things out of it. For example, what took place at the end of Game 3, there's 0.7 of a second left, and LeBron says, stuff this, I've had enough, I'm walking off. Ta-da, I'm done. Now, to me, that's the emotion of the situation. Who really cares? But then you go online and people blow it up as if this is some sort of blight on the game. It really speaks to him as a person and all that sort of rubbish. How do you see and respond to those little things that LeBron might do when the spotlight is on him so much?
Well, 9 times out of 10, if it's any other player, people don't even notice, right?
Correct.
That's number one. I mean, he's held to a higher standard than everybody, and by me too, by the way. I'll be the first one to say it. I follow him so much more closely than I follow any other athlete here. I think if you did a calculation for how many pictures I've taken of each guy here, I bet I've taken 3 times more pictures of LeBron than any other player here, and I've been going to games the whole way through, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's number one. I think number two, sportsmanship matters to me a lot, right? Yep. And so if he had done that in a situation where he's walking off the court not shaking hands after a series victory, right? Let's say Miami had won, and he bails, and we're going back to the Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas stuff, right? Or let's say even that the trash talk between him and Jimmy had escalated, right? Yeah. And now he's taking it to a place that doesn't need, he's saying some crazy comment, or he's shoving somebody, or he's doing those kinds of things. I would come down hard on him in those kinds of situations. This was just kind of a fluky thing with the clock not quite aligning, right? And so they just got to inbound the ball and then it's over. So I didn't think that was, worthy of a controversy necessarily, but I do understand there's always people kind of poised to pounce on whatever he does. And, I do think like the bigger takeaway that I've always noticed about LeBron, and he'll be the first one to say this, he's had a lot of experience losing on very high stages, right? He's lost to Tim Duncan. He's lost to Steph Curry. He's lost to Kevin Durant. Yes. He's lost to a lot of really good players. And if you watch, especially recently, he always makes a point of shaking hands, of hugging, of congratulating the winner, and usually he'll have a little comment as well for the winners. And I don't know if I want to give credit to Greg Popovich for being the one who kind of showed him how to do that after the 2013 finals, but the Spurs made a point to congratulate the Heat after that just crazy 2013 finals. And ever since then, and LeBron's a dad now too, and I think that plays into it a lot as well. He's trying to set a good example for people. But if you watch, if he loses on a high stage, he always handles it with class. And to me, that's kind of the real tell. If he was to walk and storm off a court after losing to the Heat in 6, I would be getting on him. I'll promise you that. Yeah. And he just doesn't do it like that. He doesn't carry himself that way. And I think it's good for the sport that he doesn't.
No, absolutely. And you hear him post game, he seems to really get the bigger picture of the league and how he's been rewarded, and he's trying to do his absolute very best. And it kind of annoys me sometimes when there's some of the criticism that people make with the great man.
Oh yeah.
It really it rubs like rubbing bits of glass together and saying, are you watching the same stuff I'm watching? But anyway, that's they're entitled to their opinion. The two big a couple of surprises for me. If I was a man and, you go back 12 months and you're putting this Lakers team together, Rajon Rondo, to me, has been one of the sensations of the late. I'm watching this and I'll put my hand up and say, I love him as a player, don't get me wrong, but I did not think that he was going to be the right fit in this Lakers team. Well, I got that 100% wrong because he has been a star and probably not getting the accolades that he deserves for where the Lakers are at right now.
100%. I completely agree with you. The lesson from the Rondo experience is actually the same lesson from the Carmelo Anthony experience,
yes,
and the Dwight Howard experience, which is guys can really struggle once they get past 30 and not have the right fit and no longer be as good as they were in their prime. And that does not mean they're useless forever, right?
Yep.
There's a difference between playing poorly in a certain situation and being washed up. And I think that whether it's the nature of social media discourse or whether it is, all of us, stat nerd guys poring over their numbers and saying, oh my God, look what he looks like in 2014 compared to 2008. He's not the same player. We want to rush to the idea that they're washed up and that they're useless and they're done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Rondo, Dwight Howard, and Carmelo have all shown us is if you do get into a right situation, maybe if you're playing with a guy like LeBron who makes all of his teammates better, or in Carmelo's situation, you're playing with a guy like Damian Lillard who makes his teammates better, you can go from being darn near out of the league or, just looking like you're completely ineffective to actually being a really valuable player. And I also think it does speak, more generally to the fact that not everybody showed up to the bubble, right? So I think that, everybody got a little bit of boost. Like if you're a marginal player, now you look a little bit better because, other teams are shorthanded and you have more, opportunities for success maybe against a little bit of a weaker competition. So I think it's helped Rondo in that regard. But bottom line is he's just turned it up. I mean, he's looked way better than he did in Dallas, in Sacramento. I mean, he's just been way more effective. They're asking him to do less, and that's always good because, now you're able to kind of, be a star in your role rather than being asked to be a full star. And that's, a lot easier, a lot easier task. And same deal for Carmelo. I mean, look, we shouldn't go back and pretend like Rondo was good in Dallas. He wasn't. Rondo was terrible in Dallas.
Rubbish.
Carmelo
Correct.
was horrible in Oklahoma City, and he was horrible in Houston, but he was really good in Portland. So again, that's why the lesson to me is, look, you can be bad in a certain situation and not be bad forever. And we should be very careful about how we speak about these players because I do think that there was a lot of rallying around Carmelo and Rondo actually over the last couple of months of a lot of players saying, oh, they were almost chased out of the league by the media and people weren't giving these guys a fair shake. And you do have to kind of tip your hat and say, you know what, you guys are right here, but also at the same time, let's compromise. And you guys just admit that they were horrible in their previous spots. And then we can agree on everything and we'll kind of come to this middle ground, right?
Well, exactly. And I think my personal view is that in those situations, it wasn't just about the teams and the fit. It was also, I think, that they had to have a good hard look at themselves. And perhaps it was a bit of a wake-up call for them. And the light bulb goes off and says, you know what, I need to change a little bit. Maybe my attitude does stink. Maybe I am doing the wrong thing. And a little subtle change here or there, because you look at his body language. Now, it's easy when you're winning, of course. But you look at all those things and you say, hey, there is a change. There is no doubt when you look at his body language, not just, he's shooting the three ball like I never thought he could shoot the three ball. And he's doing some other things. But those other intangibles, clearly there's some changes going on in his head as well.
Well, let me ask you this, because, I mean, you played at a very, very high level, but how much does your mentality change? How much does it help when you're playing with somebody who is just way better than you, right?
Yep.
Because I think for Rondo, when you're in Sacramento and you're Rondo, you're looking around and saying like, well, first of all, we're not very good, right? Yeah. But second of all, there's nobody here who's going to tell me what to do because I know the game better than everybody else here, and I'm smarter than my coach. And he's probably got an argument that that's true. But now you're in Los Angeles and you've got LeBron, who's clearly the smartest guy in the entire league, probably get, MVP runner-up, best player in basketball. If you're Rondo, your stuff doesn't really fly anymore, right? Now it's all about, okay, like, you're the pecking order and you've got to kind of fall in. And I wonder, how often, sometimes that clicks for guys and sometimes it doesn't, right? And I feel like that's kind of what happened with Rondo is he realized, okay, you're not the smartest guy in the room anymore, so you better find a spot and fit in, right?
Oh, no doubt about it. And that is absolutely an integral part of it. And winning wallpapers over a lot of cracks as well. And sometimes when you're there and you see it and you see the changes and everything works, it all just makes sense and it clicks. But there are many, many guys like Rondo that still don't believe it, still think they're the greatest, but they're sitting behind a desk typing on their computers because they got the talent, but they just don't figure it out as they're going along. Hey, there is so much I'd love to drill into in regards to this series, but time is getting away from us a little. And can you give us the heads up and what's going to happen with Miami? Bam Adebayo and Goran Dragic, will they play?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, they're being very Spoelstra about it. That's the best way to put it. I mean, they love to keep their cards close to their vest. Now, Jimmy kind of let it slip after game 3. He's like, our defense is going to be even better when Bam comes back.
Right.
And everybody looked around and said, oh, when Bam comes back? Well, when's Bam coming back, right?
Yeah.
And so they talked to the media. They didn't really release any specific updates. Now, with the nature of Goran Dragic's injury, it's really hard to imagine him playing effectively. It's just, if you have a tear in your foot, forget about it, right?
Yeah.
Now with Bam, it's a neck strain, right? And he was actually warming up before game 3, not to play, but just to kind of go through and keep his body active. And so I think that's a positive sign. It would surprise me if Goran tried to come back and really play meaningful minutes in this series. It would not surprise me if Bam came back. And so I think if you're Miami and you're holding out hope for a way to kind of shift momentum here for good, it would be that Bam comes back and is really able to effectively guard Anthony Davis and stay out of foul trouble. And then that's sort of your path towards making this a longer series. But look, time is tight here. That's one of the things about the injuries. When you play every other night, and they're actually going to have 2 off days before game 4 and game 5, which is helpful. But, guys sprain an ankle, that can affect you for 3 games in a playoff series.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a different setup than it is during a normal year. And so it's been very hard for guys who are injured. Like Gordon Hayward missed a month.
Yeah.
And he missed 2 full series, you know? It's like, so it's just different than it usually is. The timeline is so compressed and condensed here. So I hope we get Bam back because he was an awesome breakout star in those Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, that block in game 1 was just ridiculous.
Crazy.
And then his closing effort in game 6, where he's taken over on offense and dribbling the ball from the 3-point line to the rim and dunking on Daniel Tice. I mean, he's just been a great story. So I hope for his sake and for our sake too, he gets to come back.
The other great story for me has been the emergence of this of Tyler Hero. Wasn't having a great game in game 4, but when the game was on the line and still in the balance, shooting like poorly, but comes in, knocks down a 3, gets to the rim. I mean, this guy's got some agates, some real guts that he's playing fearless, and is at 20 years of age. This is another one. I watched a little bit of it when he was at Kentucky for a year. I thought, oh yeah, nice pick, sort of that mid-first rounder. But no, not in my wildest dreams did I ever expect someone of his age to be able to step up like this. Is this yet another example to say, well, maybe it's because of the bubble and the circumstances of the bubble and some of the other players are not there that's making this kid look this good, or is he this good?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. First of all, I think the bubble has proven to be kind of a shooter's, gym, because you're in the same gym every single time, same shot lines, no travel. And so a guy like Jamal Murray looked incredible. Tyler Hero, kind of similar deal. And there's no crowds. You don't have to deal with the road crowd getting on you, so there's no intimidating environment. So I think from that standpoint, it helps guys like that. I go back to game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals, Tyler Hero versus the Celtics. It was an all-time case of a really smart coach daring a 20-year-old rookie to beat him. I mean, if you just look at how they defended him, they weren't throwing extra help. He was getting hot, and they just basically said, keep trying to shoot us down. Do it if you can do it. We're going to try to hang tight on Jimmy and Goran and everybody else. And he did it, right? And it's just an all-timer where, Stevens, I'm sure, came out of that game thinking, never in a million years was this 20-year-old kid going to beat us in the middle of the Eastern Conference Finals, and he did. So I don't want to take anything away from Hero's performances because he's had so many high moments. In this series, he's struggled a little bit, I think, with his confidence at times, which is unusual, not in game 3 necessarily. And I think he worked through that. He was able to settle in a little bit, but also with the physicality. It's asking a lot for guys like him and Duncan Robinson when they get switched onto LeBron defensively. I mean, they just have very, very little hope there. So Miami's done a better job of trying to hide those guys a little bit, which has been helpful. But I think with Hero, he just plays with a nothing to lose mentality. I think he feels like nobody took him seriously in high school. Nobody took him seriously in college. Nobody took him seriously as a rookie. And so it's like, hey, he just loves proving people wrong. And I do think this is it's an all basketball environment, So for these guys who are just, absolute basketball holics like him, Jamal Murray, I would throw into that category as well. I mentioned him earlier. I mean, even LeBron and Jimmy, guys who just don't really have a lot else going on. They just want to play basketball all day long. Those guys have thrived in the bubble. And so, for sure, like, if this was summer league, Hero would be like a summer league MVP candidate,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, well, he's not really going to be bubble MVP because you got to deal with LeBron and Anthony Davis. But it's almost like he's like the most improved player of the bubble or something like that,
Yeah. No, I like it. I like him. I like the way he goes about it. He's got that little bit of swagger I think you need in order to survive in that league. He's been fantastic to watch. Hey, just a couple of more before. I really appreciate your time. It's been fantastic to get your insights. But one of the things that you spoke about earlier is the next season and how that will unfold. For international audiences and for us here in Australia, where we're on the cusp of winning our first medal. We have got a team, an Australian team, that we're
the Boomers.
The Boomers that not only going to win a medal, that, hey, you blokes might need to pay attention because if all the stars align, we've got enough talent there that we could actually win a gold medal. Well, that's how we feel anyway. It's looking like that's going to be unlikely because Adam Silver announced that, they're not going to – they can't pause for the Olympics. Is this something you think that will happen? Do you think it's highly unlikely that the NBA is going to be able to fit their season in to cater for the Olympics?
Well, first of all, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the Boomers end the USA basketball winning streak last summer during the FIBA World Cup? Is that right?
Correct. Well, it was before the World Cup. We played the United States here in Australia in front of 52,000 people, and they got us in game one, but we got them in game two, first time ever. So it was monument. It was
Patty Mills, right, down the
Patty
stretch.
Mills, big Andrew Bogut had a good game in that one. Joe Ingles hit a couple of big buckets. So we've got and you throw in Ben Simmons into that lineup, and you go, well, hang on, this is something special. So yeah, that's why we're anxious and nervous about what's going to happen, because this could be our window that the pandemic might rob from us.
Well, here's the thing. That's why I asked you about that game, because I'm trying to butter you up before I give you the bad news. Okay, I don't know exactly. I don't know how they can make it work, unfortunately, because here's what the NBA said. Look, first of all, the NBA's got billions of lost revenue they've got to account for, right? So they are going to care about their own bottom line more than anything else. So the NBA makes about $8 billion a year. About $3 billion of those come from the arenas, right? So they've already lost a lot of that money from last season, and they're looking at losing a lot of that money going into next season just because they don't expect to be able to have full buildings. So the NBA's priority right now is to play as many games as possible in as many arenas as possible in front of as many fans as possible, right? That's their goal. The problem is whether they can even play in arenas is going to be determined by local governments. Are you able to safely have fans in buildings and those kinds of things? So they got a lot of legal red tape they've got to get through, right? And so that could lead to delays of the season. They've already said they're probably not going to play until January. That could go back even further. And they want to play 82 games because they need the revenue, right? And they want to play 82 games in front of fans if they possibly can, because they want that arena revenue too. So once you start doing it, even if you're playing back to back, you're just never going to be able to fit it in before you need the players for the Olympics next summer. So unless there's a situation where the Olympics delay again, which I suppose would be possible if there's still major coronavirus problems, next summer, they're going to have their own bottom line they're trying to answer to as well. So if the Olympics go on schedule, I would doubt NBA players, at least a vast majority of them, are available for it. And I don't see any situation where the NBA would shut down mid-season because, part of the deal is there's already resentment among NBA owners about the Olympics because they make no money off their players going over there. And if one of their players were to go over there and get hurt, they don't get compensation for that, right? So it's always this tricky dance of like, is the NBA really in favor of the Olympics participation or not? And, USA Basketball has done a good job just from the patriotism side of things, trying to enlist a lot of players to play. And they've had some success with that, especially under Coach K. But, those guys are making major sacrifices of their time, and they're not really being compensated at the same level they are in the NBA. So it sometimes gets to be a tough sell. That's why I say, look, you can expect all the guys who aren't in the NBA to be there. And maybe, you get this wide open situation where the USA doesn't even really field a good team. And maybe your second stringers beat the American second stringers. You know
No,
what I mean?
we don't want that either. We want a legitimate win because we feel like that we're right on the cusp, and it's sad. I live in this fanciful world, and that looks at the Olympics beyond just the dollars, which we all know that's what it's about as well, and the NBA and the dollars. And for me, in my Olympic experiences, to me, the world needs an Olympic Games right now. The way in which the Olympics unites people, the way in which it brings the world together, goes beyond just the dollars and cents. And it's some way that there was this world that clearly it's not going to happen, but I think that it could have a profound impact. And the NBA is so huge and has such an influence on the Olympics these days. If those guys, not just the American guys, but the other European stars, if they're not there, it detracts from the whole experience. So, but basically, you've just taken your left foot and given me a swift kick in the agates, and now I'm feeling bad that we're not going. But hey, we still hold hope. The other one is that what we've been seeing with the in Australian basketball is a lot of these young, talented players, high school kids, coming to Australia. Now, I'm putting you on the spot here because you may not be familiar with a guy like LaMelo Ball or RJ Hampton, a couple of kids. And there's another Australian, Josh Green, that played at Arizona. He's likely to be in the draft. Do you have a sense, and we're not going to hang it on you not because your focus is there right now, but do you have a sense for these guys that we're familiar with here in Australia on their prospects and when exactly the draft will be?
So the draft has been tentatively scheduled for, I believe it's November 18th. And there is some wiggle room that could potentially move. And the NBA and the Players Union have to make a financial agreement for next season before they can kind of hold that draft, I believe. Right. So, but that's pretty much locked in. You know, Adam Silver said it's not necessarily in full pen, but it's pretty close. Now, in terms of those players, you know, a lot of basketball fans here in the country follow the high school prospects like LaMelo before he even got to Australia in the first place. So those guys are already sort of on the radar. I will say when they go to Australia, for a lot of people, they fall off the radar and they turn into like this international intrigue, man of mystery where, you know, people, because of the time zones, people aren't able to watch anything more than highlights. And so, you know, there's actually been steps recently by the NBA and the G League, which is sort of like the minor league here, where they're going to try to keep those players here in America and keep their showcase games here in the country. And now and I do think it was a little bit in response to this competition from the Australian League, because they're thinking, you know, a guy like LaMelo is worth something, even if he's not playing in college. So you know, let's get him in a situation where he can make some money and not have to fly halfway across the world. So it could be a situation where that new G League arrangement where they're sort of, you know, compensating players to stay here, it could cut Australia out of the loop a little bit.
No, it will.
You know, we'll have to see how that, and so we'll see how that part shakes out. But, you know, for me personally, I think LaMelo is going to be drafted really, really high. I think in part because this isn't a great draft class. I think the trickiest part for him is fit, because if you look at the team that like won the lottery, Minnesota, they have a lot of young players. Do they need another young ball handler, lead playmaker when they just traded half their team to get D'Angelo Russell? I'm not sure those two guys can play together very well. So maybe he doesn't go 1 and maybe he doesn't go 2 to Golden State, because Golden State, their backcourt's pretty set, right? But it's hard to see him slipping much further past that. And I just think just based on the pure talent and the upside, I think people understand that his dad is a question mark, but he's also no longer fresh and, you know, he's not trying to sell the sneakers quite as much anymore. He's not, you know, trying to like be as active. Lonzo's kind of become his own man and become a pretty successful pro. So I think that there's fewer red flags around LaMelo than some people actually think. And I think that a lot of people are just going to be captivated by his upside. So I expect him to be drafted very high. And, you know, I guess the bigger question for that is just how many guys follow that LaMelo Ball path in the future. And I think that's a tough question. I'm not sure as many guys are going to be doing that going forward.
No, they won't. And my understanding is that there is the NBA put a very, very strong cash incentive to stay in the G League or even that academy setup that they've got that they're creating there. So it's going to be a lot tougher. But I will say that when you look at the players that have come to Australia, have played in our league, and the learnings and the teachings and all those things that have certainly appeared so far to have held them in good stead. Speaking of Australians and a former number one pick, Ben Simmons. He is a marquee guy, probably one of the most famous athletes, albeit that he's playing in the United States, here in Australia, very well known. What's the future you see for him? Doc Rivers comes in. Do you see trades? There's a lot of talk. You read on the internet that maybe there might be some talk between him and Joel Embiid, that they give up on that combination and one of them might get traded. Where do you see Ben Simmons in his projections of what his future might look?
Well, I first saw Ben Simmons play when he was a junior in high school. I think he was at Montverde at that point.
Yeah.
And needless to say, in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, the other competition wasn't really up to snuff against Ben Simmons. I mean, this guy was just dunking every single possession and throwing no-look passes, running up and down the court, looking like a man among boys. And, I'm named Ben as well. And there's not very many Bens in the NBA. So I always felt a little of affinity for him, like, okay, this kid's going to be something real special,
Yes.
It's funny how we get these little things like that.
Yes.
I think for me, my favorite version of Ben Simmons has been the version that plays loose and free when Embiid is not healthy. You had that stretch running into the playoffs a couple of years ago where Embiid was out, and Simmons is leading them up and down this fast break style, and they're putting up incredible offensive efficiency numbers, and he's putting up triple doubles, and it looks great. And I think what frustrates me about Philly's offseason is that they looked at their embarrassing first round exit, which, Simmons didn't really have any part of because he was hurt. And they looked at needing a coaching change, and that was a little bit overdue, I think, with Brett Brown. I mean, that had run its course. They needed a new voice. It was pretty obvious. And they thought, well, let's try to treat the symptom here of let's try to put a happier face and a new face on the organization, really, rather than treating the disease. And to me, disease is a strong word, but the fundamental problem with their organization to me is that Simmons and Embiid are both franchise players, and they would both be better off if they were their franchise players of their own franchises. Right. And, when you're Simmons, if you surround him with 4 shooters, your offense is guaranteed to be awesome because he's that good of a passer and he's that dynamic of a playmaker, right? He's going to have more room cutting to the basket. He can play up and down as fast as he wants. He's going to look like the franchise guy he was drafted to be with that number 1 spot. If you're asking him to play in the dunker role as a 4, and you're playing with Embiid and, Embiid's taking all these shots and he's in the paint clogging things up, he's never going to look like the player he's supposed to be. And it just never made any sense in the world to me to take the ball out of Ben Simmons' hand and give it to Shake Milton. Who's Shake Milton, And, he's a good player, but he's not Ben Simmons. He's not a number 1 draft pick. And so I just think that they had a lot of strategic changes of course. They're like that sailboat that just keeps going back and forth, back and forth. And I think what Doc Rivers does is he comes in and he's going to be rallying the troops. He's going to try to reset the relationships. He's going to try to step up the accountability, and they're going to buy into what he's saying, right? But I still just wonder, what's the ceiling of that group look like? Would we all be better off if they did trade a Ben Simmons or if they traded an Embiid? And they just we pick one of these two. We're going to build around this guy in a meaningful way and kind of go forward. And so for me, I have actually found the last year or so of the Ben Simmons experience to be very frustrating because I feel like he's not living up to his capabilities, but it's really through no fault of his own. It's just a contextual, a situational situation where it's it's the classic square hole round peg, right? And I don't know how you resolve that without a trade. I don't think this is a coaching matter. I don't think it's a strategic thing. I just think that they built this huge big ball team, and they needed to just take a different approach.
Well, if you hear the comments of Jimmy Butler, of course, played alongside both of those guys, and he speaks of, again, those personalities, those intangibles about it all. And he was, I wouldn't say scathing, but he was not overly complimentary of Ben Simmons when it comes to that personality you need to be the leader of your team. Do you see that? Do you see elements of that in Ben?
Well, look, Ben is very cool for school, right? I mean, is that a phrase that you guys use?
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah. It's just like, he knows he's the man because he's been the man for a long time, right? And so I think that also it comes back to buy-in. And I go to, a great comparison point I would use is Harden. because with Harden, it was very easy for him to be too cool for school when he was the sixth man in Oklahoma City, and he's wondering, am I going to get the money? Am I going to get the shots? Am I going to have my own team? Once you install him in Houston, you start building the whole thing around him. Well, surprise, surprise. He's an MVP candidate 5 years in a row, and he wins one, and he takes you to these playoff runs, and they haven't won a title yet, but he's been the best version of himself. In the NBA, a lot of the job is just catering to your best player and getting your best player in a position to succeed, right?
Yep.
All the coaches that stick, that's what they have success doing. All the coaches who get fired, it's because they didn't make it work with their best player, right? And I think with Simmons, he's good enough to be the best player on his team, but because Embiid's there, he's constantly having to cater to Embiid or wait on Embiid.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Embiid has not lived up to his potential to me. I think that there's conditioning issues there. I think it's a style of play thing as well. The game has gotten so fast and so offensive oriented. He's kind of, he's zigging when everybody else is zagging.
Yep.
And so that's why I just think it's been frustrating. Like I can just, like a good example is Phoenix with Devin Booker, like they just build this young, exciting team around Booker and they let him have every shot that he wants. They go out there and have fun, and they've actually made some progress here, and they should be a winning team in the not too distant future. I can imagine Ben Simmons in a similar spot where, I mean, his team should be number 1 or 2 in pace in the entire league, right? And Philly's nowhere close to that. And they're playing with these ankle weights and Embiid and Horford just slowing Simmons down on every single possession. He's never going to look good in that spot, right? And so he's going to get criticized. People are going to say, oh, he doesn't shoot three-pointers. Oh, he's not confident. Like, no player is perfect. He's got some weaknesses to his game. But he's also, more than anything, just in a circumstance that just does not cater to who he is as a player. So I'm on the trade Simmons campaign. If you don't trade Simmons, trade Embiid. Right. Because either way, Simmons winds up winning.
Right. And I agree with you in regards to Embiid. I put him in the category that will look back on his career and these enormous expectations and an outstanding player. And I'd love to have it, really, I don't want to diminish what he's capable of, but I don't think that he's going to be as good as what people expected him to be, and how he can impact the team. But anyway, that's another argument. Hey, last one before we let you go. Just wanted to get your take for the Brooklyn Nets fans out there. If I was a Nets fan, the comments that Kyrie Irving have made over the last couple of days would just send a shiver down my spine and saying, oh, geez, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through this. Because the one that stuck to me is about the coach with Nash, in to say that, he's sort of going to be like a general manager type and not really the head coach. And, hey, KD and I, we're going to be able to coach this team. I mean, that rings alarm bells in my head to say, well, they're cooked. If that's the attitude, they're cooked. Yeah. There's no way they can have success. Should I be that way, or is that just the way of the NBA these days and what Kyrie's saying is actually true?
Well, let me say this. I actually got my start writing. I started a blog in 2007. It was called Draft Kevin Durant. Yep. And the whole point of the blog was to convince the Portland Trailblazers to use the number 1 pick to take Kevin Durant over Greg Oden, because I believed in his potential so much. Yep. So I've been following Kevin Durant. Yeah, well, it worked out okay for me. But I've been following Kevin Durant's career very carefully ever since. I think that there is a chance that his decision to leave the Golden State Warriors for the Brooklyn Nets and Kyrie Irving could go down as one of the worst free agency decisions ever made by a star player, period. Right. Because I think that Kyrie doesn't really compliment him on the court that well. I think that Kyrie doesn't have the self-awareness of his limitations as a player. I don't think Kyrie's going to make Kevin Durant better. And I think off the court, he complicates everything for your organization. It's no surprise that Kenny Atkinson is gone already. It's no surprise to me that they wanted the absolute most player-friendly coach they could get. And it's also no surprise to me that within 2 weeks, they're kind of like walking all over him, And I think it's really unfortunate for their organization that this is kind of like, where it's gotten to. And of course, they're going to say, hey, we're taken out of context. We're misconstrued. You're not understanding what we're thinking. I mean, that's been Kyrie's argument ever since he was telling us the earth was flat, is that we just don't understand. And, I do think actually we understand Kyrie Irving pretty well, right? And to me, I think this situation is setting up. It's like it's kind of a sequel of the Boston situation, but it's a little bit even more depressing because the expectations are going to be even higher because you have Kevin Durant. I think that you have even less organizational, institutional control there because you've got a general manager in Sean Marks, who's not as nearly as well known as a Danny Ainge, right? You've got a brand new coach in Steve Nash, who's not as well respected as a Brad Stevens, and you've got an ownership group who's brand new compared to Boston, which has been around there for a long time. So I think that there's a really good chance that it's just going to kind of be chaos reigns in Brooklyn. And I've been selling stock in the Nets the whole way through, and I've said this: Steve Nash will be a successful coach in Brooklyn if he can be the person to convince KD that Kyrie needs to be traded. If he's able to do that, if he's able to be the guy who breaks up that partnership, then they'll have a chance. But I just don't see any way for Kevin Durant to be able to carry Kyrie Irving to a title, or even to really the finals, frankly. And I hate to say it, but it's just one of those situations where, like, everybody has that friend who just kind of married the wrong person, right? Yep. It's not the right fit. It's not the right partnership. And that's exactly how I felt when Kevin chose the Brooklyn Nets. I thought, well, I can understand the desire to go to New York. I can understand the desire to have a superstar level partner because all these players are teaming up. You just picked the wrong guy, bud. You just did. And I don't know how long it's going to take you to figure it out, but you picked the wrong guy.
Well, would Steve Nash be saying this? If he's here and you'll start, one of the franchise guys with those types of, he must have, he's been strutting around, I've got this great job, look at the team I've got, and he just must have went, oh my God, what have I got to do?
Well, I think if you're Steve Nash, look, you could say, hey, I've got 2 of the top 15 players in the league, and I've got 1 of the top 5 players in the league. So as a first-time head coach, that's pretty good. And you're probably
one of them says, I'm not even going to be the coach.
Well, yeah, look, you got to have some competitive ego yourself as the coach, right? And you're going to say, okay, well, I understand where you guys are coming from, but this is how it's going to be, and I'll show you during training camp. And obviously, I'm going to be player friendly. I'm going to listen to you guys. I'm going to involve you, and I'm going to compromise with you along the way. And I think Steve Nash learned a lot from Steve Kerr too, so that's helpful. Yeah. But I do think he's got to be going into this eyes wide open because the track record on Kyrie goes all the way back to Cleveland. It's not going to be a surprise if he's a difficult personality to work with. And I think, sometimes coaches love that though, more than anything, right? I feel like coaches, they don't necessarily always want the easy job. Sometimes they want the one where they can make the most impact, and
well, that's true.
But who knows? Sometimes that can really backfire on your face as well, right?
Well, he'll look like an absolute genius if he can get those 2 guys singing from the same hymn book and they get that franchise going where it would, because clearly the franchise is prepared to invest a lot of resources to bring about that success. And KD is one of the favourites of all fans these days. He's a star. So let's hope it all works out. But speaking of stars, you, my friend Ben, have been an absolute star. The amount of minutes that you've provided for us here goes beyond anyone's reasonable expectations. We are not worthy of this amount of time from you, and I can't thank you enough, and wish you well for the remaining of the bubble. You've got a book coming out, which after this conversation, I'm going to be really looking forward to reading about all the little goings on, because we've learned a lot about America and about the bubble through this. One of the things early on in the bubble experience that Leonard Copeland, who normally sits alongside me, was talking about, that I didn't know, firstly, that strip clubs sell the best chicken wings. Was not aware of that of that fact, the entire experience is so unique. We'll never see anything like it again. Well, let's hope we don't anyway. And it's been handled magnificently, and you've reported on it brilliantly. And looking forward to some of those zingers. Can you just, as we say goodbye to you in this book, give us a little something that no one knows about, that is a topic that you're going to drill into?
Well, here, I'll give you one little detail from a scene that everybody knows about. So you'll remember the big Milwaukee Bucks protest, right?
Yes.
And of course they're in the locker room for 3 hours, and they're on the phone with politicians in Wisconsin, and they're drilling up, this list of their, basically demands or their requests. And then they want to put together this press release, and they're bringing in a whiteboard, and they're writing it all down, and PR staff is taking, copious notes and everything else. But a little detail that most people don't know is that they were in that locker room so long, there was no bathroom in that locker room. So they've got the media, we're off this little side pen, and we just happened to be right next to the bathroom.
Yes.
So every once in a while, every 15, 20 minutes, you had one player walking out slowly. It was like the walk of shame, right? And obviously they're in there having serious conversations, and they don't necessarily want us to know what's going on. And we know a lot of these players, we see them around every single day, and they walk right past us, go use the bathroom, 30 seconds later, walk right back into that locker room and don't say another thing. So, I mean, that kept happening for a couple hours. And at first we couldn't figure out why guys were coming out. And then finally we put 2 and 2 together. So, you know, it's the little moments of levity like that in a very serious situation that I think just encapsulate the bubble. You know, it at times it was very draining and exhausting. At other times it was kind of whimsical and funny.
Yep.
You kind of got a combination of both those things. And so, you know, you mentioned the book. I think it's called Bubble Ball. It's on Amazon. I'm not sure if it does international shipping yet, but it will eventually. But you guys could check that out for sure. And hopefully it will be out in May, and it will kind of, you know, bring together all the different aspects of what life was like down here, because it's been funny from start to finish, you know, and that's one thing I'll never forget, because the other thing about that night, I show up, you know, it's just like every other night. So I've got my keyboard, I'm plugging in my computer, I've got my little iced tea, I've got my water, I'm ready to rock. And I look up from my desk and wait a minute, there's only one team. Well, I've been covering thousands of games. Have I ever seen only one team show up? You know, no. And so, you know, it was that kind of like aha moment where, okay, this one's going to be a little different than the rest of them, you know?
No, absolutely. Hey, Ben, I could listen to you talk for days. It's been an absolute delight. You give us some incredible insights. Clearly, the work you're doing there with the Washington Post and the other podcasts, you've got the Sports Illustrated Open Floor, I think, and then you've got a couple of other ones as well. You do?
Yeah, I've got one called Greatest of All Talk, and I do it with my old buddy from Sports Illustrated, Andrew Sharp. We puts out it's twice a week subscription podcast. You go to greatestofalltalk.com. That's kind of like my own personal baby right now, because we're like entrepreneurs. So we're selling T-shirts, we're doing the whole thing. Yeah. And so it's been really fun.
The Greatest of All Talk. I'll check it out and then I'll tune in. It would be an absolute delight. You've entertained us here enormously, and we thank you. And most importantly, safe travels, my friend. It's we turn on the news, and we have our country has a relationship with the United States like no others. We are so aligned, and it's concerning. It is really concerning when we see some of the stuff that's going on, but let's hope that it all figures itself out and common sense prevails, and we can get back to some sort of normality real soon. Good luck with the remainder of the finals. Clearly, you think the Lakers are going to get there, and I think most people would agree with you. But it's been a lot of fun. Thanks very much, Ben. Appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me. Just take it day by day, podcast by podcast. We'll be all right, right?
This has been a No Filter Media production.
Say what you want.